Dark Souls 3 might be the last Dark Souls game in name to ever be released. Hidetaka Miyazaki came back to work on the series after a break on the second game, and he applied every little thing we've learned over the long journey that's led us up to this point. The result is the most tightly crafted and polished Dark Souls game, and also my favorite in the series. Comparing the gameplay to the previous entry, the character and many related actions are the fastest they've ever been. Rolling is rapid, smooth, and provides plenty of iframes. Many of the lightest weapons got a big speed buff as well. The related actions also consume surprisingly little stamina, letting you spam that R1 button like your life depends on it. You can even walk around while drinking Estus, which also replenishes your health near instantly. These changes allowed the developers to create some of the fastest and most intense boss fights of the series. If there is one complaint I have to the general population of the boss lineup, it would be that some of them can be a bit squishy. It can be satisfying to be doing a lot of damage, but in many cases I just want the fights to go on and on. But I think it means a lot of good things about the bosses that I actually wish for the fights to last longer. I'm going to throw this out there because I might as well, but I actually preferred how slow the healing from the Estus Flask was in Dark Souls 2. It meant that you really had to earn your openings to heal, and couldn't just press it whenever you wanted to, or you would get punished. The animation looks a bit silly with how slow it is, but it works well mechanically. The problem with the near instant healing of Dark Souls 1 and 3 is that if you get hit, you can get away with just pressing the heal input immediately. Even if you get hit by another attack, you will probably still come out better off. And you might not even get poise broken, because the animation seems to give you hyper armor for some reason. This is kind of sloppy design in my opinion, because if there is no downside to healing, then you might as well just not give me the choice and extend my life bar 5-fold. So, let's get into the actual boss lineup and start with what is the best tutorial boss of the series. This slab of iron and muscle will sure whoop many an unkindled ass. The Ashen Judge moves in a way unlike anything else we've seen so far. His glaive strikes take pretty long to wind up, but when they get going, they move at the speed of light. This gives the fight a very polished feel, where the incoming damage is very clearly defined. Iudex Gundyr rivals the aggression of Artorias or Sir Alon, but he moves in less, what the fuck. Phase 1 has a decent variety of various sweeps, slams and stabs. He also has an infamous backwards kick, as well as an even infamouser shoulder tackle. This attack comes out with precisely zero telegraph, and you basically just have to anticipate it. This is something I'm not a fan of. Anyway, Gundyr is a pretty quintessential swordsman boss as far as Dark Souls 3 goes, even to the point that you can parry almost all of his attacks, and riposte for massive damage. But at this point, I prefer fighting him by rolling, since it's a bit more challenging. When he gets to about half health, the dark mass of tentacles on his back will sprout out into a huge being of the abyss. The entire thing is still vaguely humanoid, but the moveset changes completely, and now the entire amalgamation is using its claw arms and gaping maw. The boss now becomes extremely weak to fire, so you get a cheese opportunity if you picked firebombs as your starting gift. If not, the fight becomes a lot sloppier now. The huge creature now becomes much harder to read. Gone are the generous telegraphs and precisely denoted damage windows. The monster is so big that the camera initially zooms out for you to be able to see him, during the phase transition. I'm not a big fan of this part, but it sure is an intimidating first-time experience. Unfortunately, this type of creature is called Pus of Man, and they will be returning later. Still, a very enjoyable experience, and a fantastic introduction to Dark Souls 3 combat. If Iudex was the tutorial boss, then we might go on to say that Vordt is the first proper boss of the game, where the player is really supposed to start getting tested. And I do not believe this mark has been hit with this hound-like beast. Vordt crawls on all fours and wields a huge mace in one hand. The most interesting part of this fight is that with each strike he inflicts a status effect brand new to the Souls series. Frostbite will deal a little instant damage and also slightly reduce your stamina recovery rate, as well as your defenses. But this is not a big deal if you become afflicted. Vordt is a bit too big to be called a swordsman boss. His mace attacks are pretty defined and well telegraphed, but the size does not work well with the camera. You can get under him during some attacks, and during this time you're staring at some amalgamation of silver and blue textures of his body. The best strategy, as you might have become accustomed to, is to stand behind his voluminous behind and wail on the poor dog. He will try to jump away, but does not have much in the way of defenses in that area, so get used to seeing this. Most of his attacks are forward facing or slam downward. They're pretty slow and not that unique or exciting. When he gets to half health, he will play a little phase transition and open up with a triple charging attack, followed up by a sweeping breath of ice. This might be the first time I say this about a charging attack, but it does not feel as janky as some previous examples, and it's very intuitive to dodge. Still, his moveset does not get changed much, and besides that special opening, he will still slowly swat around with his mace. For some reason, when I was playing this time, he skipped the usual opening combo and just started attacking normally. The best thing about this fight is how many memes the Phase 2 music brought us, and I guess the visual effects of the frost particles and glowy eyes look pretty neat. Oh boy, that's a big arena! Look at all those pretty pink flowers, and the hollows praying to something in reverence. I hope the boss will fit this theme and be something really epic, like an honorable black knight on their trusty steed, and not some rotten tree with ball sacks for weak spots. Yep, this here is a huge rotten tree with ball sacks for weak spots. Most of its body is impervious to damage. The main weak spot is his crotch, and hitting it will deal chip damage, but it will eventually burst and take off a chunk from his health bar. There are actually a few other weak spots you can hit in Phase 1, like this one on his wrist or calf. The tree is not very aggressive nor exciting to fight. Most of his attacks involve some kind of flailing around with his limbs. The size works against seeing what he's doing though, as you're usually staring at his thighs or lower body, and must deduce what he's doing from those movements alone. He can also stand up and do a butt slam to create a pool of disgusting acid around him. He can also shake his head for an aerial bombardment of seeds, but it's really hard to tell where they will land, and you must move your camera upwards to see this. Not a fan. When you pop the big set of scrotum at the front, the tree will stand up and slam down again to break the floor from underneath you. This is his transition into Phase 2, as now a few more ball sacks become available to hit around his body. He also regrows the biggest bunch of balls, and they now become indestructible, but they remain a weak spot. The biggest difference is that he grows an additional fleshy arm from his stomach to attack you. This is technically the weakest of spots, as each hit will deal the most damage here instead of the scrotum, but his arm cannot be popped either. The fight doesn't change all that much. The additional arm is a bit faster and more active than the other limbs, but it doesn't make the fight any more exciting. I don't know why, but I find its telegraphs really weird and unintuitive. This boss is generally regarded as being really easy, but I find it significantly harder than people make it out to be. Yes, the weak spots are really easy to hit, but it takes many, many hits to completely kill the tree. Plus, I find most of its attacks kind of janky to dodge, and not telegraphed well, so I usually die once during this fight. It's not trivial, but that doesn't make it a good boss. It's one of the weakest of the game, and I think it speaks a lot to the quality of this game, that this would be a pretty meh and middling boss in earlier games. If you've played this game, you know exactly why this late game boss is so early on in this video. If you kill this defenseless and innocent woman, you can choose to fight her anytime you want. And it's become tradition for my playthroughs to do so, as this boss is very enjoyable, and I really had a blast spending the time to learn how to fight her, using what is essentially a toothpick at this point in the game. I usually go to her right after killing Vordt in order to have his bonfire, but this time I wanted to grab the weapon of choice for this playthrough, the Great Scythe, in the Undead Settlement. So I killed the tree while I was there. The dancer truly lives up to her name. You will notice this immediately. Many of her attacks are extremely slow and gracious. She really looks like she's trying to gently sweep the air in majestic and hypnotic ways, rather than fight for her life. She tends to be a bit more passive than most bosses, but in between attacks, she will walk around in circles around you, which makes it feel less passive. Though some of those openings can occasionally get excessively long and become a bit boring, but it doesn't happen too often. I also really like her headpiece with this extremely sweet looking ethereal blue veil. I always buy this helmet when it becomes available, even if I don't always use it. Also, the fire imbued sword will actually set the environment on fire on contact, and it will spread. This doesn't have any functional effect, it just looks sweet. Her swords also leave these golden streaks where they slice across the terrain. The dancer has a similar posture to that of Vordt, but she is smaller, and I think this change plays a lot to her favors. I know that her companion is supposed to feel more brutish, but it works to the detriment of the fight. You can usually see almost the entirety of the dancer's body. Furthermore, I think her slender physique means that it's easier to read her movements, and the telegraphs can be a lot more subtle while still being very readable. Vordt's thickness means that his attacks and movements must be a lot more obvious and deliberate. I've already written as much for the dancer as I have for Vordt, and I haven't even started describing the fight. I must say, when I first fought her, I thought this boss was on the upper edge of alright, but as time went on, she was slowly drifting higher and higher towards the top, and at the moment she is borderline a contender for my favorite base game Dark Souls 3 boss. For what is essentially a pure swordsman foe, she has some real variety to her attacks. Besides some individual strikes or combos with her single flaming sword, she can also do an AoE explosion or this extremely high damage grab. She's also got this move where she cuts through the ground in an arc and explosions come out in the spot after a delay. All of her sword attacks are very sweeping, smooth and unnatural. For the phase 2 transition, she will pull out a second sword from the underground, and will open up with a Beyblade spin that goes on for absolute days. You better make some distance when she does this, because avoiding this move when up close is near impossible. She gets a few new moves, like this highly telegraphed and easily punishable dual upward sweep, but what I really like here is that most of the attacks now have some kind of equivalent from phase 1. The overall movements she does during the attacks are pretty similar, but with differing timing windows, because she's got a second sword now. Even the AoE is now a ring of Dark Moon magic, which enwreaths the other weapon. This makes it feel like phase 1 was preparing you for the real challenge later on. Fighting this boss early will mean that you've got too little health to survive any more than one hit, so however many Estus you have is the number of hits you can take. You also have to be very diligent in studying her attack patterns, because dodging many sequences of moves without making a single mistake will be paramount. To sum up, this fight is not a tense battle for survival, and it's not trying to be. It's a test of mechanical skill and an exercise in recognizing patterns, while being a massive visual spectacle. One of my favorites, and I cannot say enough good things about her.
You want a Beyblade? Yeah. It's downstairs. Let me go get it.
No, do not.
The way I've always looked at Crystal Sage is that he is kind of like a rework of Pinwheel from Dark Souls 1. He's got primarily ranged magic attacks, and there's a smaller twist in phase 2. His moveset is not exactly the broadest. I mean, he can create magic soul masses around him, launch this big homing crystal ball, create a shower of projectiles, or this straight line ranged laser-like attack. He also has some melee moves with his rapier, which are pretty hard to see between all the flowing rags he's wearing. This boss is pretty easy to poise break, and when you hit him enough times, he will hide underground for a few seconds, and then re-emerge in another location. The waiting around is pretty boring, I must say. Knowing where he will appear requires very intricate knowledge of the game, as it's got something to do with the pattern of how the crystals appear, but I don't know myself how to predict this. In phase 2, every time he re-emerges, he will summon a few clones. These fakes disappear after taking one hit, and they use blue magic instead of purple. Now, I've gotta say, I actually kind of struggle with this part. The amount of spells and damage that starts flying around gets pretty insane. I usually die once or twice on this boss. Anyway, there's not all that much to say. The Crystal Sage does not redefine what a complex and engaging boss is like. You're mostly dodging magic spells and spending a lot of time either waiting or running around the arena. Not very impressed. This fight is so atmospheric, and the presentation is really sweet. I mean, you've got this big horde of corrupted clergymen staring at you with those glowing red eyes, and the music here is pretty fitting too. Unfortunately, the fight leaves a lot to be desired. Initially, we start with this big group of respawning Deacons. To whittle the boss health bar, you must kill the one Deacon that's possessed by this glowing red orb thing. The health bar is reduced upon the kill by a set amount, and then the orb will find a new host. Now, this big horde of slow and helpless enemies is not exactly exciting to fight. There's a lot of just chopping and chopping down several enemies at once to get to the possessed one. It gets pretty tedious. They don't do much. They will either slowly stab you with their crucifixes, slowly send out homing fireballs, emit force around them, and the like. So you're mostly just circling around the big group, getting in a few hits, then moving elsewhere to not get hit yourself. After you kill 5 Deacons possessed by the Red Orb, Phase 2 will start. This will bring a few new blue-robed clerics, as well as an Archdeacon of sorts, which is permanently housing the orb. The remainder of the health bar is now on him, and that's your target to eliminate in order to win the fight. There's not a ton of change, but the new Deacons can cast an AoE heal miracle, as well as team up to slowly conjure powerful spells. One is a simple dark projectile that gets sent out after a lengthy wind-up, and another one curses you instantly. I don't really know how to tell the difference between the two, and you must always keep an eye out for what the clerics are planning, because you must go kill them if they do the big curse ball. Honestly, I think there ought to be a bit more fanfare to an attack that insta-kills you. It should be a bit more obvious what is happening. But you're still mostly just hacking your way through this wall of meat. It's not very satisfying, and it gets even more tedious now. The Archdeacon has a lot of health too, so the fight drags on way longer than it should in my opinion. The heal miracles are really hard to counteract too, because how do you kill one Deacon amongst 20 others? This only extends the fight even further. So yeah, another pretty filler feeling boss. By these judgments so far, you might get the impression that I'm not the biggest fan of Dark Souls 3, but that's not really true. Most of the good stuff is crammed into the endgame and expansions. If you've been following the story along, then you might remember that these loonies are the first Lord of Cinder we must slay. Doing so will get us one step closer to the final goal of the game, reaching the first flame. So, you are probably a bit excited when you reach them initially. We approach this fortified manor to the sounds of some really intense sword fighting going on. When we choose to intrude, we get this cutscene of one Abyss Watcher slaying another before turning to face us. This one Watcher is the boss enemy, and we must kill him to beat the first phase. Initially, we only fight one. I must say, the moveset here is pretty polished and well crafted. This guy looks extremely skilled with this beast of a greatsword he has in one hand, and he's got a little parrying wedge in the other. But as far as I know, he doesn't actually use it to parry us. Anyway, he is super acrobatic too, and performs similarly physics-defying stunts as Artorias or Sir Elon. These slides across the ground, airborne pirouettes, and whatever this is, make for an engaging and dynamic fight. The main weakness here is that this enemy has pretty low health for a boss. He can be poise broken with every hit, and even parried and backstabbed. But this fight does not get any easier. When you enter, an invisible timer will bring another Watcher to life. This enemy is virtually identical to the first one, but he has a separate and much smaller health bar. The fight becomes really chaotic and borderline unfair. But something will tip the odds soon. When the timer runs out a second time, a third Watcher will resurrect. This one will have glowing red eyes and will actually be allied to you. He won't attack the player unless incidentally, and will target the two hostile ones. If any of the two lesser Watchers get killed, they will come back on the same timers. But the fight becomes even more chaotic in this pretty badass 2-on-2 brawl. I will say, I still think it gets pretty messy when you've got two Watchers on you, and they decided to add the low health bar and backstabbing potential to make the battle easier, but that doesn't make it completely fair. When the original Watcher dies, a cutscene will play showing him getting revived by the collective blood of the entire Legion, and is now imbued with the fire they once linked. You are now faced with just this one knight. He behaves basically the same as in the first phase, but most of his attacks have some sort of fire aspect to them. For example, they might leave a damaging trail of fire where the sword went, or send out a fiery projectile after you. This adds a twist to the formula we've just learned, and it looks really sweet as well. I think the biggest problem I have with this fight is that the health bars are way too low. You're probably going to have 7, 8, or even more Estus flasks for this fight, and I cannot imagine you will realistically run out unless you are taking a constant beating and don't get any damage in yourself. The fight is so short that even after all these playthroughs, I always keep forgetting what their moveset is like, because I never really had to learn it. To sum up, this fight is pretty climactic and visually very neat. A very solid twist on a swordsman fight, but I think they left some on the table with regards to the balancing. This guy certainly is one of the bosses. Of the 3 that I've selected to crown with this epic meme, because much like Pinwheel and the Covetous Demon, this big spooky boy is, in my view, the easiest boss of the game. The fight takes place on a big slope, and Wolnir will sit and face you, clinging onto the ground. His lower body is shrouded in the abyssal mist, which saps your health very quickly. He will periodically try to drag himself forward, bringing the abyss with him. Most of his attacks are pretty boring and involve some kind of very slow and telegraphed arm strikes or sweeps. He can also breathe out a vape cloud, which will spread deceptively fast and deals a ton of damage, which feels kind of bullshit to me. Attacking Wolnir himself will deal very little damage. You must instead attack these glowing friendship bracelets. These are all that's keeping him from succumbing to the abyss. Each one breaks in 3, 4, maybe even 5 or more hits if you're using a weak weapon. This is very easy to achieve with how slow he is, and destroying one also staggers him for a significant period of time, while also putting him back down, which gives you some breathing room. After you destroy one of his bracelets, he might pull out a sword if he lives long enough. This doesn't change the fight much, but there's also a chance that some skeletons might come into play. I don't really have any more to say. The fight basically boils down to running around and hitting some bracelets. This will end really quickly, either by him dying or you getting vaped into oblivion. The run back usually takes longer than the fight itself. The first and only real demon boss of the base game. There's been some minor mini-bosses around, like this Taurus-looking warrior, or this calcified and crumbling stray demon. Anyway, keeping with this theme of dying demon kind, the arena is covered in corpses of stray, Taurus, and Capra demons. There's literal mountains of this stuff. The old Demon King does look kind of old, withered and dying himself. He is pretty slow with most of his attacks, which involve a few combos with his hammer and many different fire magic spells. The melee moves are generously telegraphed and are deceptively slow, but I don't like how big and solid the weapon is. Many hammer strikes will move you around, which is kind of annoying and doesn't feel polished. Anyway, the fire attacks are where it's at. The Demon King has 2 phases, and the second one isn't all that different from the first. He gets a few new spells, but it's mostly the same thing. Anyway, the boss can use a quick combustion type move to incorporate into his combos. This is pretty tricky to avoid if you aren't expecting it, so keep a ready finger on your dodge button. He can also vomit out these fire lines, either in a sweeping arc in front of him, or downwards to spread radially. It's a bit hard to see exactly where the damage lines are due to the fire effects, so it almost acts like an AoE, in that you must make some distance to comfortably avoid them. He can also pound his hammer repeatedly to summon a contracting and expanding ring of fire around him. Honestly, this attack is kind of hard to avoid. I usually try dodging it by jumping over, and it works only inconsistently. I would also prefer if the precise borders of the ring would be a bit better defined. He can also conjure a shower of exploding meteors. He finishes this telegraph with a rapid swing of his hammer, but this doesn't deal damage. Probably the coolest aspect of the fight is that once the boss has around 20% or so health remaining, he will channel all the chaos inside of him for one final massive AoE blast. This explosion is very big and extremely powerful. I tend to die instantly if he happens to get me. This is something you probably won't expect if you're fighting him first time, so it might feel a bit unfair. But if you do notice it coming and survive, the king is now devoid of all his power. He can't even lift his hammer anymore. He lies there, contorted, barely able to move, trying to swat you away ineffectively. This, of course, lets you easily finish him off. Honestly, I cannot even be mad that the blast deals too much damage, because this moment is so sad, yet cool at the same time. So, the fight does not feel all that polished, but I think people give it too much flack. The moveset is really interesting and unique, but that's not enough in this case to make an exciting battle. And the moment at the end alone makes it worth doing this optional boss. Well, if it isn't the roadblock himself. I didn't count, but on my first playthrough, I'd guess that I died the most either on this boss or another one we haven't come to yet. I must say, the opening of this fight is pretty epic. You enter this large and long cathedral, and the Pontiff is slowly approaching you from the other end, holding one sword in each hand in a unique stance. As you get closer, the swords simultaneously light up, one with fire and one with dark moon magic. He will usually start with this jump attack onto you. This boss is mostly a swordsman, but he's got plenty of tricks up his sleeve. First of all, the, in massive quotation marks, basic combos he does with his two swords would make previous standout swordsman bosses, like Fume Knight or the Abyss Watchers, commit absolute sudoku over how long and hard to dodge they are. He will interlace some 3 or 4 hit combos with this special massive whirlwind of death. This looks impressive and is basically too fast to even panic roll through. You kind of have to back out of range. Furthermore, it seems like this is precisely the point where the bosses specifically get designed to punish panic rolling. Some of the attack timings feel so deliberately paced as to catch out a player who just got hit, then rolled out of habit, only to get a face full of greatsword. The saving grace here is that Sulyvahn can be parried. This opening jump attack is a good opportunity to sneak in some damage. You can bait him into it again by making some distance. I kind of feel like I'm cheaping out when I do this in phase 1, but if not for parrying, I don't know how I'd make it through phase 2. When you take off about a third of his health bar, the Pontiff will grow wings and create a damaging aura around him during this transition. He will then soon try to leap out of range and take some time to summon a phantom clone of himself. This clone has his own health bar and will actually preempt everything the real Pontiff is doing slightly earlier. Of course, these are real attacks that are just as lethal. They also gain a few new aerial-based attacks. For example, these plunging slams or this AoE bombardment. The clone will teleport back onto the Pontiff if they ever get out of sync or separated too much. It almost feels like you're encouraged to get away from the two. If the message of this absolute onslaught of blades and magic isn't run away, then I don't know what is. When you do, the two will sometimes use two ranged options, this fast soul spear or slower arc of magic. The arc is trickier to dodge than it seems because it slows down over time. You might also catch some plunging attacks to your face. Honestly, I only have one consistent strategy for this phase. Bait out the long-range jumping slam, dodge the phantom's attack, and immediately press parry. This setup and timing will precisely counter the real Pontiff's plunge and give you an opportunity for a riposte. It's supremely satisfying to do, as it is dangerous. But I genuinely don't remember how I got through this fight without this technique on my first playthrough, when I didn't know how to parry. Nothing else I try seems to ever work consistently these days. The two Pontiffs create an overwhelming combo. The clone has too much health to be quickly killed, but even if you do, he will soon get re-summoned again. Still, it's so refreshing to have a boss that challenges me to this degree so much playtime in. The Pontiff feels like a lethal and extremely skilled swordsman, making for a hugely exciting and demanding skill check well into the mid-game. Aldrich and Yhorm are the next two Lords of Cinder we must eliminate, but the two can be tackled in the order you prefer. I usually go for Aldrich first for some reason, maybe it's a force of habit. Anyway, this fight is kind of a letdown compared to the Abyss Watchers. The build-up is amazingly well done. You reach deserted Anor Londo, what used to be the city of the sunlight deities. But in the time since Dark Souls 1, the cathedral is literally in the Boreal Valley, shrouded by an eternal, chilling night sky, on which the only feature to look up to is a perpetually crescent moon. The zone feels even more deserted than previously. The friendly blacksmith is dead. The main hall is almost pitch black and filled with corrupted clerics and black sludge enemies. And there is a fog gate right where Ornstein and Smough used to be. Entering the arena, you will see that Aldrich is basically what is depicted in the intro. The floor is covered in mire. The boss is a filthy worm with the upper body of Gwyndolin, who is being slowly consumed. He also wields a sword strikingly similar in shape to that of Nito. I think the usage of this thirst trap is not incidental. I do kind of see Aldrich as a rework of Gwyndolin, and I will explain why soon. Aldrich does have some melee attacks, but most of them are anemically slow and weirdly telegraphed. The bulk of the fight lies in the ranged magic attacks. Most prominently, these little homing wisps, which deal chip damage, but he really likes to summon a lot of them. The other very prominent attack is this rain of arrows. There are actually two variants of this with exactly the same telegraph, one for each phase, and they have really different properties. I wish it was better communicated that this attack is different between phases. Anyway, Aldrich also has a soul spear for when you get really far away, which completes the trifecta of moves inspired by those of Gwyndolin. When you slap the bussy enough times, Aldrich will create a damaging AoE and hide underground. He will then resurface in the furthest of the four corners of the room away from you. This is a filler kind of move, and it creates a lot of unnecessary running around, but the fight will be a lot shorter without it. The running feels kind of passive, but it adds some much necessary pacing to the fight. The way it will probably look like is that Aldrich will start off with some ranged magic attack, then you close the gap to get in some damage. He will do one or two melee strikes, which aren't all that exciting to dodge, and then once you deal enough damage, he will hide and relocate, rinse and repeat. This dynamic is not bad, but his sword attacks are really janky and not exciting to avoid at all. You know what happens when he reaches half health. A fire-imbued phase 2. There are several minor and major differences. Firstly, Aldrich will summon the soul masses not only when he specifically casts them, but also every time he sinks and resurfaces. Even when he slides around to cast them, it feels like there's way more of them. This overall makes for a much more hectic battle, and you're probably going to have many projectiles coming at you all the time. Furthermore, he will also leave a bit of fire on the ground, which deals a little bit of damage. The biggest difference, as mentioned previously, is that the Rain of Arrows spell will be almost an entirely different attack. In Phase 1, this spell is laughably easy to avoid by running sideways or behind him. It also has a fairly short duration. In Phase 2, this attack gains near perfect tracking and almost omnispatial range, and the time duration feels like it can last till the heat death of the universe if it wants to. This attack is notoriously difficult to avoid, and I honestly still have absolutely zero idea what the intended way to do so is. My only consistent response to this is to run and stand in front of this statue here, which, for some reason, is the only spot in the arena the arrows cannot reach. It's cheesy, but so is this attack, and I really don't have an answer to this move. Furthermore, he also gets the Life Hunt Scythe spell. He will summon this illusory scythe and sweep it around him twice. If it hits you, he will regenerate a significant chunk of his health. The telegraph is distinct and generous, but the attack is still pretty hard to avoid if you're being too aggressive. I don't really see why people consider this boss to be easy. I find the magic spam in Phase 2 really intense. The Life Hunt Scythe is pretty consequential, even if you rarely get hit by it. And the Rain of Arrows is just bullshit in general. Still, the boss is pretty janky in many areas, and it's not very exciting to fight him. But there is some perverse, mild enjoyment I derive from it every time I play. This boss right here used to be the King of Lothric, but he is now a Pale Drake, for some reason. To me, this feels like an homage to Seath, but it's quite a different boss fight mechanically. Oceiros has a vaguely humanoid posture. The dragon is bigger than you, but very thin as well. This makes for an almost swordsman-like boss to start off with. Oceiros will use his staff to hit you, jump around to plunge attack, sweep his tail, or use a magic spell to summon pestilent mist around him. He is cradling an invisible baby in the other arm, which I'm sure has some really deep and interesting lore implications. These attacks are well telegraphed and don't have any jank. This would have been a flatly fine fight for Dark Souls 3 standards. Unfortunately, there is a phase 2. When Oceiros loses about a third of his health, he will smash the baby into the ground for his phase transition. Honestly, this guy is so relatable and literally me. He will then become more feral in his combat, going down on all fours and becoming a beast boss. His moveset changes completely. The most interesting addition is the sweeping crystal breath of the original Pale Drake. Most of his attacks now become some variant of flailing around with his limbs, fast bites, and infamous charging attacks. I'm sorry, but the speed here is too much. Most of his combos consist of more attacks than I can count, and they come out at rates of multiple for each second. He also has the worst charging attack of any FromSoft game. He reaches speeds of a rocket ship, and about the same time as I can remember what I had for breakfast. There is zero telegraph to it, and it feels so unfair. The other attacks are a bit slower, but they're not much better. He jumps and runs around a lot, so even if you dodge all of his attacks, by the time they're done, he is on the other side of the arena from you, so there is no time to punish. I don't really have any more words for this fight, it just feels like a big ball of what the fuck. Phase 2 is frustrating and unfair. It's exciting, but that doesn't make it good. It's exciting because it always feels like you're on the verge of being what the fucked into the Shadow Realm. Jimbo. Another callback style boss with a great build-up, though this time it's from the start of the game. The whole Untended Graves area is great. It drops you right back into a dark version of the tutorial section completely unceremoniously. Once you realize where you are waiting in anticipation of what will happen when you reach Gundyr's arena, and initially it doesn't seem like much. Gundyr is still kneeling and gets up the same way as previously, though you don't remove a coiled sword from his chest. The music is the same, the moveset is the same. Phase 1 champion Gundyr is identical to Phase 1 Iudex Gundyr, so why is he called different? When he reaches Phase 2, he gets into overdrive. He doesn't change his look, but the moveset gets altered significantly. He will phase transition by doing this spin into roar move, and then follow up with a charge into strike combo. This attack is really hard to dodge if you're caught at the wrong range, because it has great tracking and many instances of damage dealt, so just rolling through it is not an option. He gets this new combo involving twirling his halberd around and either kicking or shoulder bashing you. Even the basic combos are so much longer. If you thought Iudex was aggressive, get a load of this guy. Even though he will mostly be doing the same basic attacks, they feel so much more oppressive now. You will be constantly low on stamina with how often he attacks. It's still fairly easy to parry him, but it doesn't feel like a cheese, because if you mess up, Gundyr will never let you recover. This fight feels like a refinement of the tutorial boss, and the heightened speed and aggression can certainly pose a challenge, even for veterans. It's exciting and complex, and it feels like a scrap for survival from start to finish. By the way, this is the second boss of the two bosses that I might have died to the most on my first playthrough. A puzzle and a gimmick boss, but not done nearly as well as some others. This boss enemy is this huge wyvern, which is extremely healthy. You might say this boss has a lot of health. It takes a lot of hits to slay this enemy, if you will. A message on the ground tells you to plunging attack. The intended way through this fight is to run this gauntlet of regular enemies to make your way up to these rafters and to jump down to kill the boss in one hit. The wyvern itself is pretty bland. It's not really any better to fight than the Hellkite Drake from Dark Souls 1. As you're running around the obstacle course, it will sweep different sections in fire breaths, turning it into red light, green light, which is not exactly the most exciting thing ever. It can hover in the air, but it will stay in the same place on the map regardless, so you can take your time. The main enemies of the area, and the only ones you will be facing during the run, are these snake men. The small ones come in two variants. They can wield a shuttle and shields, or two daggers. The big ones either have big axes, or this weird blade on a chain they throw around for some of the jankiest and weirdest attacks of the series. The axe ones might be my favorite to fight, but the rest is not all that fun. They're pretty basic enemies, but the dagger ones are really annoying. They flail around so much, and their movements feel so awkward to gauge. The area has some pretty useful items scattered around it, but you're only going to be able to collect all of them once the boss is dead, which is kinda cool. It gives you a reason to retread this area without the imminent human barbecue. Otherwise, pretty meh encounter. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I have this weird relationship with some of the hardest bosses in the series. They whooped my ass so hard the first time round that I had to spend so many attempts learning their attack patterns and how they work, that every time after, I've been able to consistently whoop their asses in return. This means that, while they are the most tightly crafted and complex enemies on an absolute level, whenever I fight them now, they're very predictable and easy. Consequently, these battles are much more boring than they were initially, and it's actually the easier enemies that I find more interesting, like the Abyss Watchers. The Nameless King suffers from this hard, on top of being severely overrated in my opinion. The first phase starts with the king himself riding down on a storm drake. The battle takes place on a layer of clouds, and the size is effectively infinite really. This lets the flying boy make some impressive aerial maneuvers. The creature takes decreased damage to anywhere but the head, and this is really good decision. It means that you are encouraged to stay in front of the boss rather than hiding under its tail or something. It also means you must properly engage with its moveset and dodge his attacks appropriately. The Drake has a few moves where it swoons the neck around to let the Nameless King strike using his sweet looking sword spear. So a Beast Boss has a fair few swordsman type attacks, and it's pretty unique combination. The most opportune punish window is this sideways flame breath. The windup is long enough to let you run into position alone, and then you have plenty of time to wail on him. The only problematic move is this one, where the Drake flies into the air, the king throws a sunlight spear, and then they swoop in for a sword strike. It's nothing bad mechanically, it just takes a bit too long for how easy it is to avoid. This phase of the fight is kind of ragged on by many, but I don't really have any big issues with it. People say the camera can be problematic, but I don't see it. Maybe try fighting him without locking on, as I've gotten into the habit of doing for this phase very early on, and I find it genuinely easier to manipulate the camera myself. It's pretty easy and the health bar is pretty small, but it's fairly enjoyable for me. The second phase is significantly different. It's just you versing the Nameless King on an even ground. The fight looks pretty spectacular, as this boss has several storm-themed attacks. Firstly, his sword spear is imbued with lightning. He can send out two different types of shockwaves along the cloud cover. He also has a few thunder-based attacks, like this lightning stake or thunderbolt. Now, the storm drake in the room are the delayed attacks. The king is primarily a swordsman, and he has some variety to his moves. Most of them are fairly standard sideways sweeps and thrusts. However, the speed at which he moves the weapon is unintuitively slow. The windups are comparable to those of Gundyr, but the weapon moves really slowly. This is what people struggle with the most. You have to be really patient with timing your rolls, and it takes a long time to get used to this. What I don't like though is how some attacks stun you for so long that you are guaranteed to get hit by another one in the combo. Not sure what I could do to avoid this. Despite not a lot of downtime, the king likes to stand around and just pivot to face where you're standing. Combined with these slow attacks, the fight feels pretty static and not very exciting to me. If we compare it with a boss like the Dancer, she actually tends to attack less often, but just the fact that she's walking in circles around you alone makes the fight feel more like you're doing something interesting. The Nameless King likes to stand around and sweep his sword spear sideways for most of the time. That is not to say he doesn't have some movement, as he does have some lunging sweeps, and then he comes back for more. I gotta say something pretty funny, because I find this hilarious. He has one attack where he charges up lightning on his weapon, and then fires it off into the air. A thunderbolt will then drop down on your position after about a second of a delay. You can dodge this with a precisely timed roll, but there is another way. The easiest method to avoid this attack is to just walk away a few steps, and then turn your camera away from the king. If you're not looking his way when the thunderbolt drops, it will completely miss. I have no idea what causes this, but it's so weird and amusing. So overall, fairly enjoyable boss with a decent gimmick, but I really don't see why people put him so high up in their rankings. The second phase feels a bit too static, and it's lost a lot of its nuance after playing the game so many times. This boss fight is one of my favorite moments of the series, but far from my favorite boss fight. I will do my best to explain why in a moment. But first, do you know this guy? It's Siegward of Katarina. You've been meeting him at a few points in the game. He's wonderfully written to be a friendly and heartwarming NPC who helps you out in battle once, and you end up returning the favor several times over. He sometimes brings up something about needing to fulfill his duty, but never goes into detail on what this entails. I will take this moment to appreciate that every time I play through this game, I genuinely feel a pleasant sense of camaraderie and connection to this charmingly clumsy onion, but a competent and courageous warrior too. I complete his questline every time I play through Dark Souls 3, and I consider it a failed run if I fumble it up, or he dies at some point. So, what does this have to do with Yhorm? Well, if you've completed all of Siegward's encounters, he will unexpectedly come in with you into the boss fight. Yhorm is his friend, and his duty was to come back and slay the giant if he ever ignored the call to link the fire again. Yhorm himself asked for this, by the way. This is such a wonderfully sad backstory that gives so much more emotion to this fight. Siegward doesn't come in phantom form, he uses his corporeal flesh and blood, and if he dies at any point during the fight, he's gone for good. This is the second time we get a non-phantom helper for a boss fight after the Ivory King from the previous game, and I do believe these two are the only examples of such events. Yhorm himself has a ton of health. Whittling him down using traditional tactics takes ages. The intended method is to run over to the opposite end of the arena and collect the Storm Ruler weapon from underneath his throne. Only 2 of such weapons exist in the world, and Siegward has the other. The weapon art on the sword lets you hold it in a special stance to charge up a unique attack. Pressing R2 while holding L2 will emit a storm projectile that deals massive damage to Yhorm. Siegward will be doing the same thing. Now, the boss is too big to play nice with the camera if you're fighting him normally. That's why giving the Storm Ruler a ranged attack is a smart choice for a gimmick fight. The charging of the projectile takes long enough to not be trivial, and you might have to struggle for an opening or two. However, locking onto his head and using the Storm Ruler's special attack will stun Yhorm for a long time, and make him go down onto his knees before he gets up again. This won't work if he is at any point during this entire animation, so timing your attacks along with Siegward can effectively stunlock the boss. It also only takes 10 hits to bring him down. This makes for a very easy fight overall. Yhorm doesn't have any ranged attacks, he is mostly a melee character. Still, his size means you can rarely feel safe. His moveset has got a lot of personality, and it really gives off a sense of a strong berserker with nothing to lose. It's pretty spectacular, but you won't get to see much of it, due to Yhorm spending most of the duration of the fight down on one knee. I will say, this gimmick fight is one of the better executions in the series. There is a lot of spectacle, and the weapon art feels designed to be used for this boss. The developers have learned a lot from this going forward, and you can see this in Elden Ring's Rykard boss, for example. A shame that Yhorm does not pose any challenge. Fans of the original Dark Souls might catch this little reference. I will refrain from calling this guy Ornstein, because it's literally an empty suit of armor that belonged to some unspecified Dragonslayer. It's got a huge great shield in one hand, and a huger, greater axe in the other, so slightly different armaments from what we're used to. I don't really know how much there is to say. This boss is mostly just a really solid swordsman enemy. It's got some combos and special attacks, all of which are pretty smooth and telegraphed well. It even incorporates the shield into some combos, or for some bashing attacks. I must say, whoever warrior used to be inside the suit certainly seems to have been an extremely competent and skilled warrior. I really like this one attack, where it looks like you've staggered the boss for an opening for easy damage, but it ends up regaining some balance and slams down the axe with a small shockwave. This might be one of, if not the first instance in the series, of a boss being able to enter a special stance to execute one of several attacks, depending on how far away you are from them. If you're close, the armor will do this really weirdly telegraphed and oddly delayed, but exceedingly fast slash. I thought I had the timing for this attack down, but this run-through I might just have gotten hit by it every single time. It feels a bit awkward for my taste. Other attacks include whatever this is. Anyhow, this boss is very aggressive and the fight feels dynamic. It likes to move around, which makes it feel more fluid and eventful than the Nameless King, and it attacks more often than Iudex Gundyr for a more intense experience. When the boss reaches half health, 2 extra pilgrim butterflies will
Now shut the fuck up.
approach the arena and occasionally do some ranged attacks, like a series of projectiles, an exploding variant, or a straight laser. Wait, where have we seen that before? These attacks come out very rarely, but I don't feel they make the fight better. The armor is already plenty aggressive enough, so I don't see how I'm expected to be simultaneously checking my flanks to see what the floating enemies are doing. To sum up, this fight is highly intense and well crafted, a very enjoyable experience with little gimmick. A bit too short for my taste, but it's not a big deal. I don't know if you're aware, but I slightly, ever so mildly, barely at all really, like these guys. Just a little bit though. The Twin Princes are another boss that's been slowly growing in my esteem over the years. But the difference between them and the Dancer is that these guys started basically at the top already. I'm not kidding, they were easily my favorite base game Dark Souls 3 boss back then, and they might just be my favorite Dark Souls boss period by now. I'll get a bit more into this dynamic later. The fight starts with the crippled Lorian taking you on alone. He's wielding a huge, flaming slab of a greatsword. He will sometimes crawl around on his knees, but a lot of the time he will teleport instead. He teleports down to fight us initially, and during the fight he teleports all the time. He teleports between combos, he teleports mid-combo, sometimes he teleports just to drop down and plunge attack you. His moveset is fine for a swordsman boss. He attacks a bit less often than the Dragonslayer Armour, but he feels frantic when doing so, and the teleporting around really keeps you on your toes. When he does so, it delays whatever attack he was doing by a fraction of a second, so don't dodge too early. Possibly the most creative usage of the teleport mechanic is when he teleports behind you and far away. This will break your lock-on, but he is now slowly charging up a ranged magic projectile in a line, so you have time to turn your camera around and look for him. He also gives a pretty distinct sound cue when charging it up. Beating phase 1 is not too difficult. Lorian does not have all that much health. When you do, Prince Lothric himself will teleport down and revive him. From now on, the younger prince will stay on his brother's back. This completely changes the complexion of the fight. Lothric is able to cast some magic spells independently of what Lorien is doing. He will start off by summoning this huge group of soul masses, which fly towards you one by one. During this time, I usually just run away and focus on avoiding damage. He can also cast a fast soul spear, and now he will help to create the charged line projectile. There are 2 health bars for both of the twins now. If Lorien is killed, Lothric will resurrect him again with half health after a lengthy cast time. We must kill Lothric to win the fight, and we can deal damage by either hitting him when he's on Lorien's back, or when he's resurrecting his brother. But he will create an AoE explosion when he completes the cast, so don't get too greedy. Lothric has a fair bit of health. It usually takes me more than 1 cycle of killing Lorien to beat the fight, so this means I usually have to kill the Elder Prince more than 2 times. This is a pretty lengthy fight by Dark Souls 3 standards, and I'm all here for it. If there ever was a fight I desperately want to last longer, it's always this one. Whenever I'm doing a challenge run, this fight is kind of what makes or breaks the challenge. If the fight lasts very long, then the challenge did its job, otherwise it wasn't sufficient. The visual and audio design for this fight might be the single best thing about it, and also one of the best in the series. There is a beautiful symphony of different colors: red for the huge sword, gold for Lorien's armor and the environment, and a glistening platinum white for the magic projectiles, Lorien's hair, the light coming from outside, and the feathers scattered around the arena. The music might be my second favorite track from this game. I'm saying second because with how good the next boss theme is, second is as good as they can hope for. Wait, what does this remind me of? Anyway, this entire package makes it feel like for the first time in the series, we are slaying true royalty. The only problem I have with this fight is that sometimes Lorien will start telegraphing one attack, then teleport away and perform a different move. This seems like it's not intentional, and it's kind of unfair, because that's not the point of a telegraph. You might get hit by an attack that came out with 0 warning. I don't really know what else to say. If the footage doesn't make you want to play the game for this fight alone, then you have no soul. I love Lorien's moveset, and I love the twist in the second phase. It seems such an obvious thing to make, but it adds so much personality to the fight. This boss is a masterpiece of game design in my view. This boss fight is probably going to be the most emotionally hard-hitting of all, despite being slightly inferior to other greats in my opinion. After 3 games of struggles and perseverance, we've reached the kiln of the first flame for the final time. And much like in previous games, the flame won't go out without a fight. The soul of Cinder is an amalgamation of every single person who has linked the flame. He starts off as a swordsman and has a pretty unique moveset. I don't really know what it is about it, but I usually find it pretty unintuitive to predict what he's doing. Still, his attacks don't do much damage. So overall, this form of the boss is in the same category as the Abyss Watchers, where I don't see them enough to know them inside and out, so fighting him feels like a fresh experience every time. However, the boss has an invisible timer that will make him change forms on the fly. He will alter between the swordsman and three other classes, so to speak. He can become a spear-wielding paladin of sorts, and use healing miracles and Wrath of the Gods style attacks, along with some vicious spin slashes and charging thrusts. This form might be the most interesting to me personally, because the other two are a bit wank. The Sorcerer form is by far the easiest. He can perform a very slow magic greatsword slash, he can cast some ranged soul spears, and that's about it. The most bullshit part is that he can perform a buff on himself, which periodically summons groups of soul masses without him having to do anything afterwards. This persists even if he changes form. Feels kind of unfair to me that he can get off attacks without doing anything. The last form is a ninja flipping pyro bandit with a curved sword and fire magic. The melee attacks here are too fast for this game. I said it. There's just never a safe opening to attack if that's all he's doing. He has a ranged fireball spell, he can summon toxic mist in a huge area, and even perform power within. Those are going to be your only windows to attack, but otherwise just wait until he changes form again. It kind of makes sense to have so many different builds represented in this one character, since it's supposed to be a combination of every player character who has linked the flame, as well as named characters. And speaking of named characters, who was the first one to ever link the flame? The music in Phase 1 has sounded pretty epic and bombastic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was a bit too generic. Like there was more to it I wasn't hearing yet. And when you deplete the health bar once, you will see what happens. The boss stands still and regains all of his health for round 2. The music swells again, and a familiar tune plays. Gwyn is back with a vengeance. He starts off with a new long combo, which will lock you in for the remaining duration if you ever get hit. Manus style. But otherwise, it's fucking Gwyn. The only other difference is that he cannot be parried, plus he can use new lightning spells. This part of the fight especially is not challenging, because the pace of his movements is on par with Dark Souls 1, but your character moves like they're in, well, Dark Souls 3. However, that's not really the point. This is more of a touching narrative statement. It's been 3 long games since the world of Dark Souls fell into the shit, and every game it felt like it couldn't possibly get any worse. And then it went ahead and did anyway. The earth is now literally folding in on itself to deliver the Lords of Cinder to their thrones. And as you've entered the kiln, you get this view of every township, castle, village, and palace ever crumbling together and becoming one giant heap at world's end. If you've gone through 3 games, reached the final boss, heard Gwyn's theme in the music, and saw him desperately fight again, by all accounts, what should be going through your head is, what the fuck am I doing? If you still think there is a reason to link the first flame, then you haven't been paying attention. So yeah, the fight is alright, but not challenging enough for my taste. The music is legendary, and it feels almost unfair to compare it to other boss themes, since this one brings back a famous melody. The second phase is one of my favorite moments of the series, but not because the fight is stellar. Much like Dark Souls 2, I usually go to the expansions after having beaten the base game. Dark Souls 3 had 2 DLCs released, and Ashes of Ariandel was the first in terms of release date, story development, and difficulty curve. There are only 2 bosses in this one, but only one is required to even beat it, and this one is optional. The fight starts off with a few wolves and one human NPC. You probably want to draw the doggos away to kill them, and then engage the Gravetender without distraction. Still, they aren't fun to fight, so I don't think they make the fight any better. The human NPC is wielding a unique weapon called Valor Heart. This is actually a Gladius looking straight sword and round shield combo. It's got a few unique moves, like this shield bash style small AoE, or these cool sword techniques. This human is a tad more aggressive than other invaders or similar foes, but it's still basically just an invader with a unique weapon, and it doesn't make the fight unique enough. When the Gravetender gets down to half HP, he will take the time to summon the same wolf that's been hounding us around the DLC. This doggo can appear 2 times to fight as a mini-boss type enemy, and for every time you've killed him, he appears in this boss fight with less health. It's pretty nice that you get rewarded for taking the time to fight him earlier, but I really did not feel like going through that this run, since I do not like engaging him one bit. Depending on your weapon and build, you might be able to wear down the Gravetender before the wolf comes into play. If you don't, he will become more passive and start using ranged sorceries to pester you, while the dog does the heavy lifting. The Great Wolf is basically emblematic of most dog enemies you find in Souls games, except that his attacks are better telegraphed. Still, the dog moves in pretty unnatural ways to me, and the attacks don't really make for much variety. He likes to do this turbo Sanic triple charge and this ranged sweeping ice breath. He actually has a phase too, which makes him a bit more aggressive. So I guess technically this might be the first 3-phase fight of the series, if we don't count the Ivory King as having 3. The battle can get pretty gnarly if you don't kill the Gravetender in time, but it's pretty tame otherwise. It can feel kind of intense at some occasions, but the enemies here don't feel very polished, so it's on the lower end of Dark Souls 3 for me. This is the only mandatory boss to beat the first DLC, and is situated right at the end. And oh boy, you can tell where all the effort went. Sister Friede is this surprisingly normal-sized woman wielding a long scythe. The fight starts off in this long and narrow arena against just Friede. For a boss that's aiming to be top of the shelf when it comes to difficulty, it might be surprising to see that she can easily be poise broken and backstabbed. Still, there's many tricks up her long sleeves. Phase 1 is a pretty standard swordsman type boss. She's not extremely fast or aggressive, but she does have some ice-themed attacks, where she creates lines of crystals on the ground, dealing slight damage and building up frostbite, and then shattering for high damage, kind of like Seath. Her standout attack is this one, where she jumps back and turns invisible. She will then try to leap over and behind you, but might end up somewhere else if there's a wall there. She will then slowly charge up a grab attack for huge damage. She will become visible if, at any point during this process, you can get close to her. You can track where she's leapt to, primarily by sound, but she might also smash some props and emit a bit of ice particles with her footsteps. This is such a creative move, and it keeps you on your toes. Only thing I don't like is that sound is the only consistent way to locate her. Depending on where she's landed, you might not catch the particles or objects breaking. Might be a bit petty, but I don't think sound cues should ever become the only viable way to do something in a game. This move feels inspired by the entire fight we had with Priscilla. We also have a returning mechanic from the Dragonslayer Armour, where she will hold the scythe in a unique stance before executing one of two attacks, depending on your distance to her. If you're close, she will do this double spin slash, or this line of ice if you're further away. Anyway, this phase of the fight is just about the right length to not get tiresome. The second phase will see Friede resurrected, and Father Ariandel will join the fray as well. He's bound to this chair and clutches the bowl with a flame inside. He will crawl around and use it as his weapon. If you're far away, he's got some gap-closing charge attacks. What's interesting is that instead of his whole body becoming a hitbox, the attacks come out when he slams the bowl down. This feels a lot more fair than many charge attacks in the series. He will also use some ranged fire magic, like pouring out some liquid lava around you, breathe a sweeping volume of flame, or this highly damaging explosive AoE. The arena is far bigger now to accommodate the large new player in the fight, but also to allow for some interesting dynamics. Friede will behave similarly to Phase 1 if you get close to her, so going for Ariandel is easier, especially since they share one health bar. In this case, she will not move around all that much, and instead will prefer to cast the lines of ice towards you. This is very well crafted, since you don't even really have to look at her to anticipate the ice attacks. They will appear beneath you before shattering. Still, you will want to keep an eye on her, as she can spend the time to cast a healing miracle, healing them both, so you must be quick to react and attack her to stop this from happening. This is widely regarded as one of the best examples of multi-enemy boss battles, because you have one aggressive and fairly slow creature taking up most of your attention, and another dimension of freedom with some ranged attacks coming at you every once in a while, for a unique and dynamic dance. I tend to agree, but I almost wish that Friede's ice attacks were a bit more problematic and attention demanding. I also wish Ariandel's explosive AoE was telegraphed better, as he's starting the combo. He starts off with two downward slams, which look exactly like any other melee attack he's doing. Then he winds up a third one for significantly longer, before slamming down and exploding. Only at the third telegraph can you be certain he's doing the AoE variant. Anyway, beating two hectic phases nets you a Titanite slab. You've done it. It's over. Clearly not. Friede gets right back the fuck up for round 3. Wish I had such stamina. She is now Black Flame Friede and wields two scythes. One of them is magical and ice-oriented, and the other is enwreathed in Black Flame. Whatever that is. Anyway, this phase is probably the star of the show for me. The whole sequence looks so visually appealing, along with the black fire effect and various ranged attacks. This phase is like phase 1 on steroids. Friede will prefer to fight mano a mano, and the speed and dexterity she's displaying with these double scythe combos that lasts longer than I did fighting her. Most of them have some distinct ending attack to make it easier to remember when she's come to its end. Friede still can turn invisible, but it's really inconsistent what she decides to do. Sometimes she will just stand around and occasionally throw out a set of ice lines radiating from her, and other times she basically behaves as normal, except invisible half of the time. She has this crazy looking grab attack, where she comes at you and spins like a Beyblade. I also really like this one, Semi-Grab, where she will pull you in with the magic scythe and try to follow up with the black one. There is a split second where you are able to dodge again and avoid the attack, but it's really nerve-wracking. Anyway, I'm kind of struggling to put into words what her moveset is like. There's just a lot of blades, a lot of ice and fire. I hope the footage will encourage you to fight her because it is a highly unique and enjoyable fight. I'm going to put her on the toppest of tiers because on a series-wide list she deserves it. But if I was making just a Dark Souls 3 exclusive ranking, she'd be a tier below the tippy top. This is because the difficulty for me is a notch down from the goatest of goats. The first boss in the Ringed City DLC, and one that is mandatory for progression. This multi-phase and multi-layered fight is one of my favorites of the game. You enter the arena by taking a massive plunge down into a hollow tree. The battle actually takes place in the ruins of the original Firelink Shrine from Dark Souls 1. Initially, we have two enemies, Demon in Pain and Demon from Below. The one that's lit up by fire will jump you and go for aggressive melee attacks. The dark one will usually shoot out this line that explodes after a delay, or other sweeping breaths. All of those attacks inflict toxic buildup, so getting hit multiple times involves a harsh penalty. The most iconic attack of the Firelit Demon is this charge attack. Much like Father Ariandel, the damage comes from the arm slams rather than the movement itself. After some time passes, you will see the Dark Demon will initiate a fire within him and turning into the active form of the other one. Soon, the one that started out active will turn passive, and this continues on. The two demons alternate between active and passive forms with differing movesets and playstyles, with moments of overlap of identical states. It's usually easier to fight the active one and focus on dodging his attacks while looking out for the ranged lines. You don't even need to turn your camera away because you will always see the line coming. I almost wish this was a bit more demanding and I'd had to at least work my camera a bit. Unfortunately, these enemies really don't play nice with the camera, and you will be getting flashes of uncomfortable close-ups of blurry demon textures, so maybe it's for the better. This is my biggest complaint about the fight. When both demons are active, you're better off running away and waiting until one goes passive. Honestly, I don't even have a problem with the overlapping of phases. This is because even when both demons are aggressive, you know that just by running out the timer until the next change, you're making progress. The demons have separate health bars, so you're encouraged to wear down one at a time. But the alternating phases make this difficult through organic game design. Is it easier to fight an enemy that's attacking you directly and is always next to you, or running to slap a second one while the first one pursues you? Clearly it's the first option. I really like this gimmick. But anyway, you've gone and killed the second demon. The best duo boss fight of the series is behind you, right? The entrance here is spectacular and epic. The Demon Prince is a more intense and chaotic version of the previous Batwing demons. He opens up with this explosive fireball attack. The animations, the music, and the lingering lava effects convey a sense of a corrupted and savage master of the twisted fire arts. He borrows many attacks from the active form of the previous fight, but he has many more moves, such as this aerial ground sweep, a fairly normal grab attack, or some of these ground rends and slams. Almost all of his attacks crack and liquefy the earth, leaving puddles of lava behind. The area denial is not too strong, but it adds a new dimension to the fight. For the aerial sweep, if you stay locked on and dodge sideways, the camera will turn around to follow the monster and you will roll right back into the lingering lava. So I always disengage the lock-on when he does this. He also has an ultimate move, which actually differs between fights. It always starts with this wing sweep, which is supposed to stagger your character, to let the prince leap away to make some distance and begin preparations. If you've killed the dark red demon in the previous phase first, then he will do a sweeping laser attack, which explodes the ground where it touches. He will do a brief pause to fool you into thinking he's done, before a short follow-up laser with an AoE. The first laser volley is a great window for damage if you happen to have gotten near him. If you've killed the orange demon first, then before the wing flap, he will summon 2 orbs of chaos fire. These will stay up in the air to shoot fireballs at you. The prince will begin conjuring a massive meteor nuke spell. If you deal enough damage during this time, he will get staggered out of the attack before launching however many meteors he's built up. The Chaos Orbs make this version of the Prince significantly harder in my opinion, because it's really hard to see when the fireballs are coming, while also wailing on the Prince. Anyway, pretty cool gimmick. The Demon Prince has some real health to his name. This fight will take a long time, and you will probably run out of Estus if you don't have his moveset completely memorized. In the entire fight, I genuinely have no problematic moves to talk about, and the biggest issue is the camera. I think the problem is mostly the wings on the demons often collide with the camera's position and force it into weird angles. This fight has great character and spectacle, and is the most creative and fun duo boss fight of the series. Well, we've got another invasion PvP boss fight. This one is far less creative than the likes of the Looking Glass Knight. This one will just summon a human invader who is the boss, along with a Painting Guardian NPC. This character is able to cast an AoE healing miracle that heals the Guardian for full and gives back massive HP to the boss. So, it's pretty clear this guy needs to go first and go fast. For some reason, they decided that this NPC should reappear after a delay when killed. You constantly need to switch your attention between the two enemies, and it's not a fun time. Besides that, we've got the usual Dark Souls PvP problems. I'm not going to go over it again, but the netcode is as shit as it's always been. We also must factor in that the Dark Souls 3 PvP community is the most toxic and meta-slavish of all. Oh look, someone has invaded me. I'm sure he's a pleasant and lovely chap. I can look past the fact that I've just entered the Catacombs of Karthus, but he's got a weapon from Inner Lothric Castle and wearing armor unlocked after beating the main game. I'm sure we're going to have a great time. No, okay, he's pointing me down. And this guy too, despite him being unable to kill me for entire minutes. You get the picture. I don't really know what the guy I eventually killed to beat the boss fight was doing, but it seems like he was letting me off easy. The boss player also gets a buff around them that periodically summons these soul mass type projectiles to chase you. Furthermore, we get the usual problems with latency. This, combined with the second Painting Guardian character having a very fast sword, while also being able to throw knives of their own, and the fact that you have to kill this NPC every time you want to damage the main boss, makes for an extremely spammy, unfair, unbalanced, and just bullshit fight. At least the pendulum swings both ways. You see, when the game summons someone to the fight, it's done automatically. The player gets a message on their screen before getting pulled into another world. No input required. Therefore, it's not uncommon to see people get summoned who are AFK at this moment, which makes for an easy victory. If a human cannot be summoned, an NPC character will take the boss's place, who is called Half-Light. He doesn't make for a much better fight, but at least there is no network problems. I don't have much to say about him, it's just another generic NPC human enemy. Let's move on. This is not the boss fight people remember from this DLC. I'll cut straight to the chase. This boss right here was my favorite Dark Souls boss, period. Unfortunately, as time went on, he suffered the same fate that the Nameless King did, and my enjoyment of this fight was slowly dropping off the more I played it. This happened to the point that I'm genuinely undecided as of writing the script if he even is my favorite anymore. Don't get me wrong, the fight is still as exciting and tense as ever, but it's also just the same thing as ever, you know? Using different builds does not change this fight as much as the Twin Princes, for example. Midir is a huge dragon, approaching in size foes like the King of the Storm Drake, or even the Ancient Dragon from the previous game. The first thing you will notice is that he has enormous health and defenses. Fortunately, he takes double damage to his head. That's the gimmick. Everything else is just pure skill and memorization of his moveset. If there is one tip I could give you, is to stay right in front of his face. That's how he will be doing his most predictable and convenient attacks, while also giving you the best opportunity to smack his head, which he ever so graciously presents for you after he's done his move. This boss is so meticulously designed to be fought this way. It's kind of genius. You're encouraged to stay in front of him instead of under him. This solves the problem of fighting his ass more than the dragon himself. He rewards you with convenient opportunities to attack him where it hurts, after you've earned the window by avoiding his combo. It might look a bit silly at times how he leaves himself defenseless, but it's critical to the flow of the fight. This design is fantastic, and his enormous health bar makes for, in my opinion, the most challenging Dark Souls boss, which easily made him my favorite for a long time. His moveset is largely hard to describe. He will usually open up with this Tantrum combo, which takes him halfway across the arena. This attack is way less dangerous than it seems, and you almost have to try to get hit by anything. His Phase 2 transition looks spectacular, and it involves a hugely damaging AoE explosion. There's two differences now. Firstly, he can perform this attack where he slams the ground, and then summons a group of humanity sprites to home in on you. This attack looks fantastic, but it's not too hard to avoid just by roll spamming. The other difference involves one of his standout attacks. He has this long laser sweep that he aims around in various directions, like he's cosplaying the tripods from War of the Worlds. In Phase 2, this attack lasts even longer and it deals absurd damage. If you've played Elden Ring, Placidus Axe has inherited a very similar laser that feels like it lasts just as long. Appropriately, this insanely long and destructive attack gives you an exceptionally long time to punish. The rest of his attacks are mostly various combos of claw strikes, bites, and flame breaths in sweeps or straight lines. All of them are really smooth to dodge and are telegraphed well. Furthermore, these combos are all so distinct that they're really easy to remember, even though there's a lot of them. I usually try to challenge myself when fighting these hardest bosses with some new limitation every time I fight them. This time, I was challenged to do the fight on keyboard and mouse, which was my first time actually trying this control method. So, have a quick keyboard and mouse review while I'm at it. Remembering the keybinds was very difficult, and many of them felt really arbitrary. Steering the character didn't feel too bad, honestly, though pressing space to roll felt really unresponsive. I beat him on my second try because someone walked into my room and distracted me the first time. Overall, not too bad, but I would never pick this over a traditional controller. Beating Midir gives you access to the Spears of the Church Covenant, which will let you become the boss in the previously mentioned fight. This is it. 3 games, 6 expansions, and 87 bosses behind us. It all comes down to this. Slave Knight Gael might just be the pinnacle of boss design as far as Dark Souls games go, and combines everything the designers have learned over more than 5 years of working on the series. The world of Dark Souls has fallen, rotten, and burned to a fine ashen wasteland. The only thing left in this universe is an unkindled ash bereft of purpose, and a slave knight hollowed beyond belief, wielding the power of the Dark Soul itself. Do I need to say more of how epic this premise is? Phase 1 starts out with Gael running around on all fours, basically behaving like an animal. His attacks are frantic and almost blind in a weird sense. Still, they are surprisingly smooth to avoid. He moves around like a madman, which gives the fight a lot of dynamicity. It's basically just sword combos and one grab attack. I don't know if it's just me, but the Beastmen from Elden Ring have a really similar combo to this ultimate attack from Gael. This phase is not all that interesting, but you will notice that he's got health, like quite a lot. This is because all 3 phases of the fight are done on this one health bar. When he loses about a third, a cutscene plays to transition for the next phase. Gael seemingly regains his humanity and remembers how to fight like a human. The dim yellow sun has now gone out, leaving just a dark blue sky. The two of you are now transported to face each other in the center of this set of pygmy thrones, where they seemingly ruled over early humanity. This might even be where the Dark Soul was originally located. Anyway, the fight changes completely. Gael now fights upright and dignified. I really like that his cloak becomes empowered as well, and with each sword attack, the cloth will swing around along with his body for a secondary attack. This means that just dodging the blade is not enough, and your roll timing will be put to maximum stress in this fight. The red visual effects of the cloak snapping around, as well as those particles coming off of Gael, are so visually appealing. He also pulls out a fucking Gatling crossbow. Anyway, I'm not a huge fan of this phase, because the boss does not move around all that much, so it tends to feel similar to the Nameless King. However, this is really just a primer for phase 3, where the real deal lies. There is no cutscene for this transition. Gael will just slump down and let his human emotions take over. They will then burst out in a miasma of homing projectiles, which slowly make your way towards you. In this phase, Gael will combine all the physics-defying knowledge of his predecessors and will make huge acrobatic leaps and borderline fly around. He incorporates many of the attacks from phase 2 and combines them into deadly and impressive combos. His cloak is as eager to slice the air as ever, and someone had the great idea of adding random lightning strikes around the arena, which are uniquely cyan instead of yellow. Probably because this isn't lightning associated to Gwyn, but natural and true lightning. This adds an additional hazard. It's hard to describe the pure chaos that occurs during this last phase. Your dodges must be as precise as ever, and Gael won't let himself get hit very often. You must truly earn your openings and take any advantage you can get. The fight is a feast for the eyes, with Gael's attacks and red effects on him and around his equipment, and these lightning strikes convey that these are the last languishes of a truly dead world, where nothing will happen ever again. The fight is intense and demanding, but it's not exceedingly challenging. The damage Gael does is not extreme, and I find it really easy to tell when his combos are over. If you're struggling, remember that almost all of his combos in this phase are made of 3 sword attacks each. Writing the description for this boss fight is not going to do it justice, but I hope the footage in the background convinced you that this boss is worth fighting and a worthy climax to the entire series. With this defeat, the world is truly gone. Everything returned to eternal homogeneity, and all we can do is paint a new one with the blood of the Dark Soul. So there we have it. You have reached the end of this long Dark Souls series critique, and it can only be fitting to summarize my favorite and least favorite bosses from each game, as well as my general thoughts and feelings. So let's take a stroll down what we've learned so far. Firstly, my general opinion of the Dark Souls games gets only better with each installment. The first games laid some important groundwork and foundations for what was to come later down the line. My favorite boss has got to be Manus for being climactic, spectacular, varied, and demanding. My most hated boss in general also happens to be in this game, the Bed of Fucking Chaos. I think this fight clearly shows that the old Demon Souls style jank and hit or miss gimmicks were still well within the dev team's tendencies. It basically took the entirety of the base game until they learned how to consistently make good bosses, of which the DLC is full of. Dark Souls 2 was made by a different team, and it shows. It's abundantly clear that, if the entire collective of people working on the game was reduced to just one person, then this person did not learn much from the previous game, and basically started from scratch. My favorite is the Dark Lurker for being extremely varied and tightly designed, while also being one of the most creative bosses in the series. The Ancient Dragon takes the bottom spot because it's janky, it's boring, it's static, nothing happens, and then you get stomped on by a foot that is 10 meters away from you. One of the most boring fights of the series. The final Dark Souls is my personal highlight, and even the worst bosses in this game would be pretty okay fights for the standard of the previous games. I'm talking about bosses like Ancient Wyvern, which are only as good as the gauntlet during the fight. Picking a favorite is really hard, honestly. There's about 3 or 4 bosses that compete for this spot in my head. Before I recorded the gameplay, I would have picked Midir. But honestly, if I'm going to rank them based on who I'd like to fight the most right now, it would be the Twin Princes, as long as I'm using a weak weapon. It hurts a bit leaving out all the other greats like Gael and Dancer, so don't take this pick too seriously. I think the main takeaway from this series is that the games are troubled masterpieces, with tumultuous development cycles, many scrapped ideas, and unfinished concepts. Despite finding jank and weird design choices every time I play, they remain hugely influential and one of my favorite game series ever. Anyway, thank you so much for the support I've gotten on these videos. I really believe that I might have a shot at creating something special with this channel. It's so heartwarming seeing nice comments complimenting my hours of hard work, so please let me know what you thought down below. I hope to make many more game critiques in the future, so stay tuned for that. I'll be seeing you later.